It was late at night when he noticed the small rise and fall of his son's chest had slowed, and the little boy's skin felt hotter than usual. He sat by the edge of the bed, holding his son's tiny hand, and felt a knot tightening in his stomach. He had been avoiding this moment, hoping the fever would pass, hoping the coughing and weakness were just a phase. But deep down, he knew it was worse than he could handle alone. He had been a single father for 2 years now, after life had taken the woman he loved away in an accident. Every day since then had been a struggle to keep things together, to make sure the bills were paid, the fridge had food, and the little one had at least a semblance of a normal life. The little apartment they lived in was small and cluttered, but he made it home, filled with love as best as he could manage. Tonight, however, love alone did not feel like enough. He rubbed his eyes and listened to the wheezing breaths, the cough that shook his son's body. He had tried everything he knew at home: warm water, fever medicine, comfort, but nothing seemed to work. The thought of taking his son to the hospital made his chest tighten. He didn't have insurance, and the money he had saved was barely enough to cover next week's rent. Hospitals were expensive, and he had no one to ask for help. He swallowed hard and forced himself to stand. The hallways of their apartment building were silent as he carried his son to the car. The night air was cold against his cheeks, and each step felt heavier than the last. He glanced down at the boy in his arms, noticing the pale face, the trembling hands, and the soft whimpers that cut through the quiet night. He whispered words of encouragement, hoping to comfort his child while trying to convince himself that he wasn't failing. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Every red light, every bump in the road made him flinch, worried that his son's condition would worsen before they arrived. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, heart racing, eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror to see if his son was breathing. The city lights blurred around them as he tried to focus on the road, each second feeling like a lifetime. When they finally reached the emergency room, the receptionist looked at him with a mix of impatience and routine concern. He explained the situation quickly, trying to keep his voice steady while tears threatened to spill. The nurse immediately took his son inside, leaving him alone with a small clipboard, a pen, and the looming reality of the cost. He sat down on the uncomfortable chair, trying to breathe, trying to calm the racing thoughts. The hospital staff moved quickly, bringing in doctors and nurses who checked his son's vitals, asked questions, and prepared for treatment. He tried to focus on what they were saying, but the numbers, the instructions, and the unfamiliar medical terms felt like a blur. All he could see was his son lying there, vulnerable and dependent on him, and the fear that he might not be able to protect him. Hours passed slowly. He paced the waiting area, listening to the soft beeping of monitors, the distant voices of nurses, and the occasional call of a doctor. Every time the door opened, his heart jumped, hoping it was good news, hoping someone would tell him that his son was going to be fine. But each update came with medical jargon he could barely understand, and the uncertainty made the night feel endless. He remembered the nights when his son would wake up crying from a nightmare, and he would hold him close, whispering that everything would be all right. He felt that same helplessness now, multiplied by the fear of losing him to something he couldn't control. He thought of the little moments they shared, the laughter, the bedtime stories, the simple meals they cooked together. Those moments felt distant and fragile, slipping through his fingers as the night dragged on. Other families passed by, some with smiles, others with worry etched on their faces. He couldn't help but notice how different their situations seemed. He tried not to compare, but the thought of money, of resources he didn't have, gnawed at him. He thought of the pile of bills waiting at home, the unpaid rent, the grocery store trips that had become harder and harder. The fear of not being able to provide, not being able to save his son, was overwhelming. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to a friend, but hesitated before hitting send. He didn't want to burden anyone, didn't want to ask for help he couldn't repay. He felt isolated, trapped in a system that required money for life-saving care. The walls of the hospital seemed taller, the fluorescent lights harsher, and his anxiety grew with each passing minute. Finally, a doctor stepped out and motioned for him. His heart skipped a beat. He followed, holding on to hope and fear in equal measure. The doctor explained that his son needed immediate attention and possibly surgery, that the condition was serious and time-sensitive. The words hit him like a punch, and he struggled to focus on what the doctor was saying. Then came the inevitable. He needed to pay, or at least make arrangements. The number was staggering, and he felt the weight of it pressed down on him like never before. He sank into the chair, trying to steady his breathing. The walls of the hospital seemed to close in, and he felt tears slipping down his cheeks. He tried to call out, to ask questions, but his voice felt small, insignificant against the enormity of the situation. He glanced at his son through the glass, still unconscious, still fighting, and felt a mix of fear, guilt, and helplessness. He thought of the life he had promised his son, the dreams he had for him, and the sacrifices he had made. And now, in this sterile, bright room, he felt those dreams slipping away, as though no amount of love or courage could change the reality he faced. The hours dragged on, each one a test of endurance, a battle against panic and despair. Through the night, he remained by his son's side, talking softly, holding on to hope with every ounce of strength he had left. He whispered memories of happier times, promised adventures yet to come, and vowed silently to never give up. The world outside could be harsh, unforgiving and unfair, but in that hospital room, he became a shield, a protector, a father who refused to surrender doubt by the time the first rays of dawn touched the windows. He had been awake for hours, eyes red, body exhausted, but heart still beating with determination. He had survived the night, not knowing what the next moment would bring, but refusing to lose faith. And though the road ahead was uncertain, filled with bills, responsibilities, and worry, he clung to one simple truth. He would do everything in his power to save his son. Everything. He sat in the waiting area, the sterile smell of disinfectant filling the air, feeling every second stretch longer than it should. His son was inside, lying on a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, and every beep made his chest tighten. He ran his hand through his hair, trying to stay calm, trying to prepare for whatever news was coming next. But the truth was, he was terrified. He had never felt so powerless in his life. Every parent hopes they can fix things, that love alone can shield their child from the world's dangers. But here, in this hospital, he felt the limits of what one person could do. The doctor came out again, clipboard in hand, and explained in careful words the seriousness of the situation. His son had a severe infection, one that required immediate treatment, possibly even surgery if things didn't improve quickly. The words floated in the air, a mix of hope and fear, and all he could do was nod. He wanted to understand, to ask questions, but every explanation felt like a reminder of how little control he had. His mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong, of every possibility that might befall his child. The fear wrapped around him tightly, but he forced himself to focus on the words the doctor said, repeating them silently in his head to make sense of them. Then came the conversation he had dreaded most, the bill. The nurse brought a paper, the numbers glaring back at him, impossible and overwhelming. His hands shook as he held it. He had no idea where he could get that kind of money, no idea how he could pay. Every unpaid bill he had ever tried to manage came rushing back to him, and suddenly the small comforts he had worked so hard for felt fragile and meaningless. He had hoped that love, care, and courage would be enough to get through this night. But the stark reality of money in a hospital was something he could not escape. He tried to reason, tried to explain, but the staff had procedures, rules and policies. They needed a commitment, a plan, a promise he couldn't give. Tears threatened to spill, and he swallowed hard, feeling both anger and shame at his situation. He had worked hard, had done everything he could, and yet it was never enough. He thought of his son, so small, so vulnerable, and he felt every bit of helplessness that comes with being a parent in a world that sometimes seems unfair. Hours passed slowly. He walked the sterile halls again and again, not knowing what else to do with himself. He saw other parents, some comforting their children with ease, others tense and worried, and he wondered why he felt so alone in this crowded space. He tried to reach out to a friend through his phone, but hesitated, not wanting to bother anyone with his problems. Pride, worry, and fear all mingled together. He felt trapped in a cycle of responsibility, love, and desperation. He thought back to his son's small laughter in the mornings, the way he would throw his arms around him after school, the bedtime stories that had become their nightly ritual. Each memory brought both warmth and pain because it reminded him of what was at risk. The thought of losing his child, or even seeing him suffer, was unbearable. He clenched his fists and whispered to himself that he would do everything to make sure his son survived, that he would not give up. While sitting alone, he noticed people moving around, doctors and nurses attending to other patients. The normal flow of the hospital continuing despite the crisis in his life. It made him feel insignificant, a small dot in a vast system, yet he knew he couldn't stop. He could not leave his son. Each time he looked through the glass at the child's pale face, he felt the full weight of responsibility and fear. He was a father, and this was his duty, no matter how impossible it felt as the night dragged on. He tried to focus on small things to keep his mind steady. He counted the steps of the hallway, observed the patterns of light on the walls, anything to distract himself from the terror that lurked in every corner. He whispered encouragement to his son, hoping the boy could feel his presence, even if he was unconscious. Every small movement, every sigh, every breath became a signal he clung to. It was all he had, and he held on to it tightly. At one point, a nurse came to check on him, offering a seat closer to the room where his son was. She spoke kindly, trying to ease his anxiety, and he appreciated the gesture, though it could not erase the fear. He followed her instructions, washing his hands, sanitizing, sitting quietly, pretending to understand the procedures. He was grateful for anyone who treated him with patience and humanity. Yet every interaction reminded him of how fragile his situation was. He remembered the moments before this night, when he had tried to manage the illness at home. Fever medicine, warm compresses, careful attention, they all seemed so small and insignificant now. He realized that love and care were not always enough. The world had rules and systems he couldn't bend, and life's harsh realities had a way of making anyone feel powerless. He fought the rising panic, refusing to show despair. But the tears that fell silently revealed his struggle. During the long night, other families came and went, some leaving with relief, others with grief etched on their faces. He observed them, noticing the differences in stories and struggles, and he felt a complex mix of empathy, envy, and fear. Every parent was fighting their own battle, yet his own battle felt insurmountable. He wanted to scream, to cry out to the universe, to ask why things were so hard, but he held it in, focusing instead on the small hope that his son would get better. Time moved slowly, and the world outside the hospital seemed distant, irrelevant. He sat with his thoughts, reflecting on how much life had changed since becoming a single parent. Every day had been a test, and tonight was perhaps the most challenging yet. He thought of the sacrifices he had made, the work he had endured, The night spent awake worrying about bills, groceries, and school supplies. He had given his all, and now he felt both proud and exhausted. Through it all, he clung to one thing: hope. Even in the face of impossible odds, he refused to let go. He whispered to his son about the things they would do together, the games they would play, the dreams they would chase. He imagined a future where this night was just a memory, a moment of fear overcome by love and resilience. It was the only thing keeping him grounded. The only light in a room filled with sterile walls and endless monitors as dawn approached. A doctor returned, updating him on the treatments, explaining what had been done overnight and what steps were next. Though he struggled to understand everything, he listened carefully, holding on to every word that offered hope. His son was stable for now, and that was enough to give him a small measure of relief. He allowed himself to breathe, just a little, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. Yet the worry remained, persistent and unyielding, because the battle was not over. He realized that despite exhaustion, fear, and financial worry, he had survived the night. He had stayed by his son's side, refusing to leave, refusing to give in. It was a small victory, a fragile thread of hope, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. He resolved silently that he would continue to fight, to protect, and to provide, no matter how difficult the path became. The night had tested him, but it had also revealed the strength he carried, the love that would not falter, and the courage that came from being a parent in the truest sense. He sat slumped in the corner of the waiting area, the early morning light filtering through the tall windows. His eyes were red and tired from hours of sleepless waiting, his body aching from pacing and sitting, and his heart still heavy with worry. Despite the exhaustion, he couldn't leave. Every time he looked through the glass at his son, lying on the hospital bed, he felt a mixture of fear and hope that kept him glued to the spot. He tried to imagine that everything would be okay, that soon they would walk out of this place together, laughing and healthy. But the worry always crept back. Across the waiting room, a woman noticed him. She had been coming to the hospital frequently for her own work, but today something about him caught her attention. She didn't know his story, and yet she saw the tired way he held himself, the quiet desperation in his eyes, the way he whispered words of comfort to a child he couldn't leave. She watched him for a few moments, noticing the worry etched into every line of his face, and the small, almost invisible gestures he made to stay close to his son. Something in her stirred. She had seen many people in hospitals, some strong, some weak, but there was something different about this father. He was raw, real, and entirely devoted. She moved closer, keeping a respectful distance, trying not to intrude. She could hear snippets of his whispered words. "You'll be okay. I promise. Don't be scared." Each word was filled with love and fear, and she felt an unexplainable pull to do something, to help. She wondered what kind of life he had, how he had ended up here alone, and what kind of father he was. She felt a deep sense of admiration for his courage, and at the same time, a pang of sadness for the struggle he was enduring. The father barely noticed her at first. His focus was entirely on his son, every beep of the machines and movement in the hospital staff triggering a spike of anxiety in him. He whispered instructions he had learned, repeated reassurances, and held his hands together as if he could transmit strength through them. He wasn't aware of anyone else. In that moment, the world had shrunk to the small glass room and the tiny life inside it. Every fear, every hope, every ounce of energy he had was dedicated to keeping his son alive and safe. The woman finally found an opportunity to speak, approaching gently and carefully. She didn't want to startle him, but she needed to reach out. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I couldn't help noticing. Is your son all right?" He looked up, startled, and for a moment there was hesitation in his eyes. He had been holding in emotions for so long, and the sudden voice felt like a ripple in his fragile focus. He nodded, murmuring a thank you, though his tone was distant, wary, and tired. She asked a few more questions, not prying, just offering attention, listening as he spoke about his son's illness, the nights he had spent worrying, and the overwhelming fear of the hospital bills. He didn't realize how much he had been speaking, how much of his heart he had been exposing, but the words spilled out naturally. There was no judgment, only understanding and gentle attention. She listened carefully, nodding occasionally, giving him the chance to be heard without interruption. For the first time in hours, he felt a sense of connection, a small relief in sharing the burden with someone who seemed to care without asking for anything in return. He explained the situation, the financial impossibility, and the desperation he felt as a parent trying to save his child. The tears threatened to spill, but he swallowed them, trying to remain strong. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply acknowledged his struggle, validating his feelings, which gave him a surprising sense of calm. She offered practical advice, small suggestions about talking to the hospital staff and exploring options, but what mattered most was her presence. She stayed with him as he waited for updates, not crowding, not forcing conversation, just sharing the quiet moments. It was remarkable how a presence like that could make a person feel less alone, how simple attention could soothe a heart weighed down by worry. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't completely isolated in his fear, like someone else understood the reality of what he was going through. As the hours passed, they continued to talk in small, careful ways. She didn't push him for personal details, didn't rush him to speak, just offered a listening ear. He found himself opening up about his life as a single father, the struggles, the long days, the endless work just to make ends meet. He spoke about the dreams he had for his son, the promises he wanted to keep, and the moments that had brought them joy despite hardship. Each story was laced with love, frustration, and the relentless hope that he could create a better life for his child. She offered him small words of encouragement, not just for the immediate crisis, but for the resilience he had shown. She reminded him that he was doing everything he could, that the love he gave his son was a powerful force, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. Her voice was calm and steady, a contrast to the chaos of his emotions, and it helped anchor him. He found himself taking deep breaths, letting a small piece of tension go, realizing that someone cared enough to stand with him, even briefly. Later, she noticed the staff preparing to discuss the financial details again. She watched his shoulders slump, the familiar look of worry overtaking his face. Without thinking, she approached the desk quietly, inquiring politely and observing the procedures. She didn't announce anything yet, didn't make a grand gesture. She simply wanted to understand, to see if there was a way to help without embarrassing him or adding more stress. Her careful attention reflected respect, concern, and a desire to act responsibly in a situation that could easily overwhelm anyone. From her observations, she realized the father was in a truly impossible position. His devotion to his son was clear, but the financial burden was crushing. She thought of the nights she had spent in hospitals herself, the helplessness of watching someone you cared about struggle, while systems and rules added more stress. She knew that sometimes a single act of kindness could change the course of a life. She felt compelled to do something, to be that person who could step in quietly and make a difference, while the father continued to sit nearby. Holding his son's well-being as the center of his universe, she made preparations to intervene subtly. She spoke to the billing department, confirmed procedures, and arranged quietly for support. She did not want attention, did not want praise, only the chance to relieve the immediate burden from someone who had given everything he had to love his child. She thought carefully about timing, approach, and how to offer help in a way that would feel safe and compassionate. All the while, the father remained unaware of the extent of her actions. He focused on every small sound, every movement in the hospital, every word from the staff, clinging to hope. He whispered encouragement to his son, stroked his hair, and kept a watchful eye on the room. His exhaustion was immense, his worry overwhelming, but he drew strength from the quiet, subtle reassurance of being near. Even without knowing it, he was being observed by someone who recognized his courage and his desperate love. When the moment came for the final discussion about the hospital bills, she positioned herself carefully, prepared to assist in a way that would allow the father to maintain dignity. She did not force him to speak, did not interfere with the medical staff's work. She simply offered the relief he could not have imagined, a silent act of generosity that would transform the next moments of his life. It was a reminder that sometimes human connection appears in the form of a stranger who chooses to care, who chooses to act, and who sees the value of compassion in its purest form. Through this quiet intervention, the father's world shifted, even before he realized it. The fear that had weighed so heavily on his chest began to lift, almost imperceptibly, as circumstances started to change in his favor. He still didn't fully understand what had happened yet, but the tension in his body eased slightly. The small hope in his heart flickered brighter, and he allowed himself to breathe in a way he hadn't in hours. The presence of someone who understood and acted on that understanding had begun to create a shift, setting the stage for the change he so desperately needed. The father sat in the waiting area, still tense and exhausted, his mind racing with worry and fear. Every so often, he looked at the small glass window to see his son, so fragile and pale, resting under the bright hospital lights. He felt powerless, but refused to leave, knowing that every second mattered. The fear of not being able to protect his child was heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. Suddenly, the nurse called him to discuss the financial arrangements again. He hesitated, feeling the knot in his chest tighten. He had no money to pay, no way to promise the sum required. He opened his mouth to speak, words caught in his throat, the weight of shame and despair pressing down on him. He imagined walking away, leaving his son behind, and the thought made him physically ill. The walls seemed to close in, and he wished desperately for a miracle. It was then that the woman he had met earlier quietly stepped forward. She approached the desk with calm confidence, asking politely about the payment procedures. The staff explained the process, and she nodded, listening carefully. Then she handed over her card and confirmed the payment. The father, still nearby, heard the words and froze. At first, he didn't understand, thinking he must have misheard. But the confirmation from the staff made it clear someone had paid the entire bill. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart raced. For the first time in hours, maybe days, he felt a small spark of relief. He looked up at the woman, eyes wide, searching for understanding. She smiled gently, a calm reassurance in her expression. "It's taken care of," she said softly. "You don't have to worry about that anymore." He shook his head, unable to find words, overwhelmed by gratitude, disbelief, and emotion. His lips trembled as he whispered a quiet, shaky, "Thank you." The tears he had been holding back finally spilled over, streaming down his cheeks as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. The staff returned him to his son, who was now stable under the careful watch of the medical team. The father clutched his child's hand, feeling the warmth and softness, and allowed himself to finally breathe. The weight of financial worry, which had felt like a crushing wall pressing on his chest, began to lift. He looked at the woman, still standing nearby, and realized that her kindness was more than a payment. It was a lifeline, a chance to regain hope. After a moment, the woman spoke again, her tone gentle and sincere. She offered him a way to move forward, not just through this immediate crisis, but in life. She explained that she could provide a stable job at her company, medical support, and assistance with housing. She didn't force the offer or pressure him, but presented it as an opportunity, a hand extended to someone who had been struggling alone. The father listened, stunned, feeling as though the world had shifted beneath his feet. He could barely process the generosity. He had spent years struggling, barely scraping by, and now a stranger had not only relieved his immediate burden, but had offered a path to a better life. He felt unworthy, overwhelmed, and incredibly grateful. Words failed him, and for a long moment he just nodded, feeling the full weight of her offer and the relief that came with it. He thought of his son and the possibilities that this new support could open for their future. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life where survival was not the only goal, where hope and opportunity existed. As he processed the situation, he noticed the subtle way she respected his dignity. She didn't ask for gratitude or acknowledgement, didn't demand attention or recognition. She simply offered help in a way that allowed him to maintain his sense of pride, while still receiving the support he desperately needed. It was a rare kindness, a reminder that compassion could exist without expectation, and that humanity could make a tangible difference in someone's life. The father spent the next few moments just watching his son, feeling the warmth of a small hand in his own, and letting himself experience relief. The constant fear and tension that had gripped him loosened, and he allowed himself to feel gratitude without guilt. He realized that this act of generosity did not diminish his own strength or love as a parent. Rather, it amplified the possibilities, providing a foundation on which he could rebuild their life. She stayed nearby, observing quietly, giving him space while offering reassurance. Her presence was steady, unintrusive, and kind, and he drew comfort from it. The way she had acted, with both care and decisiveness, made him realize that some people truly did step forward in moments of need, that hope could arrive in human form when it was most desperately required. In the following hours, the father and the woman spoke more. He explained more about his life, the challenges, the endless hours of work, the little joys he had found in raising his son. She listened with genuine interest, offering occasional advice, encouragement, and support. The conversation was natural, not forced, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that someone understood the weight he carried and the love that drove him to endure it. Later, she helped him navigate some of the paperwork and formalities of the hospital, making sure that everything was properly arranged so that he wouldn't face complications later. She showed him patience and care, making sure he understood each step and that he had the confidence to manage what came next. Every small gesture reinforced a sense of stability that had been missing from his life, and he realized that he was not alone in the world. As the day went on, the father began to imagine the future differently. No longer was he solely focused on surviving one crisis at a time. With the support now offered, he could envision steps forward: steady work, a safe home, proper medical care for his son, and the chance to rebuild their life with dignity. The weight of despair had been replaced by cautious hope, and he felt a renewed determination to honor the gift he had been given. He spent time simply observing his son, noticing the small rise and fall of his chest, the way his tiny fingers curled around his own, and feeling the profound love that had driven him through countless nights of worry. He whispered promises for the future, plans for games, outings, and quiet moments at home. With the burden of immediate danger lifted, he allowed himself to dream again, to imagine a life not defined solely by struggle, but by love, care, and opportunity. The woman, noticing his focus, offered a few final words of encouragement. She reminded him that he had done everything a parent could, that his love and dedication were evident in every gesture, every word, every sleepless night. Her words carried weight because they recognized both his struggle and his strength. and he felt a profound sense of validation, something he had not felt in years. The combination of relief, hope, and acknowledgement created a rare moment of emotional release, one that allowed him to exhale deeply for the first time by the end of the day. He knew that his world had shifted fundamentally. The fear, desperation, and uncertainty that had dominated his nights had been replaced with the possibility of stability and support. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but more importantly, a path forward had been opened. He realized that life, though unpredictable and often cruel, could also bring unexpected kindness, and that one act of generosity could ripple outward, creating profound change. He left the hospital that evening with his son, feeling lighter, stronger, and more determined. The woman's intervention had not only saved him from financial ruin, but had opened the door to a future where he could thrive, not just survive. The lessons of the day, the power of compassion, and the value of connection would stay with him, shaping the way he approached life and parenthood in the years to come. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope fully, to believe that there could be more than struggle in their lives. He realized that human kindness, when offered without expectation, could transform lives in ways that words alone could not capture. As he walked home, hand in hand with his son, he felt a quiet determination and an enduring gratitude that would carry him through the days ahead. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, the small child began to recover. Each morning, the father would wake early to check on him, relief washing over him as he noticed the fever subsiding, the color returning to his cheeks, and the playful glint coming back into his eyes. The long nights of worry were still fresh in his mind, but now they were tempered with hope. Every smile, every laugh, every tiny milestone felt like a victory, and he cherished them more deeply than he ever had before. The father had started his new job as the woman had arranged. The work was steady and fair, providing him with the stability he had longed for. Each paycheck represented not just money, but security, the chance to provide his son with necessities and small joys that had previously felt out of reach. He began to feel a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet strength that came from finally having support and opportunity to build a life that went beyond mere survival. He took extra care to maintain the home, creating a space that was both safe and comforting for his son. They spent evenings together reading stories, playing games, and sharing meals that no longer had to be improvised from what was available. The apartment, once small and cramped, now felt alive with laughter and warmth, a true home rather than just a place to stay. The father noticed that the small changes in environment and stability were transforming his son as much as they were transforming him. The boy's curiosity and energy returned, his laughter ringing through the rooms and filling the father's heart with unspoken joy. He often reflected on the day the stranger had intervened, the day that had shifted everything. It had started with a simple act of kindness, one that had seemed almost impossible in the moment, but it had created a ripple that extended far beyond the hospital walls. He thought about her presence, her listening, her quiet intervention, and the profound impact it had on his life. It was a reminder that human connection, compassion, and care could change the course of a life in ways that nothing else could. Though the father now had support and stability, he remained vigilant, aware that life was unpredictable. He still faced challenges, still had moments of doubt and worry, but he approached them with a new mindset. He had experienced the depth of fear and the heights of relief, and he had learned that resilience and hope were as important as love and care. Every problem, no matter how daunting, was now met with a quiet confidence that he could find a way through it, especially when combined with human kindness and determination. The father and son shared many quiet evenings together, enjoying the simplicity of time spent in each other's company. They went to the park, explored nearby streets, and engaged in small adventures that were now possible because of the stability he had been given. Each step outside, each new experience, was a reminder that life could hold joy again, that the struggles of the past did not have to define the future. The father marveled at the resilience of his child, the way he embraced life with renewed energy, and it reminded him of the power of love, care, and opportunity. One afternoon, the father received a message from the woman who had helped him. She simply checked in, asking how they were doing, without any expectation of gratitude or acknowledgement. He felt a surge of emotion reading her words. She had stepped into their lives briefly, with no requirement for recognition, and yet the impact of her actions had been profound and lasting. He took a moment to reflect on the importance of compassion, how one act could create a chain reaction, influencing not just the immediate situation, but the trajectory of an entire life. The father began to think more about giving back, inspired by the intervention that had changed his life. He found opportunities to help others, small gestures that could make a difference in someone else's day. Whether it was assisting neighbors, volunteering occasionally, or offering support to friends in need, he felt the satisfaction of contributing positively to the world around him. The cycle of kindness, which had started with someone noticing his struggle, now extended through him, shaping the lives of others and reinforcing his own sense of purpose. As the months passed, the father's confidence grew. He managed his job well, maintained a stable home, and nurtured his child's growth and happiness. The past fears and struggles did not disappear, but they were now tempered by experience, perspective, and the profound awareness that help could arrive when least expected. He felt a quiet gratitude, not only for the woman who had intervened, but also for the resilience that had carried him through the hardest nights. He recognized that life was fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, but it was also capable of profound beauty and kindness. He often watched his son play, imagining the future possibilities that had once seemed so distant. Education, friendships, adventures, and experiences now felt attainable, and he could envision the life he wanted for his child, a life with stability, love, and opportunities. The memories of the hospital, the fear, and the financial despair became markers of how far they had come, lessons etched into their lives that reinforced the importance of perseverance, hope, and compassion. Evenings were now filled with storytelling, laughter, and small traditions that strengthened their bond. They cooked together, played simple games, and enjoyed the routines that made a house a home. The father felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he could now provide both care and joy, stability and adventure. His love for his son remained the foundation of everything, but it was now supported by the practical means to nurture, protect, and encourage growth. Looking back, the father realized that the stranger's act had not only changed his immediate situation, but had also altered his outlook on life. He had witnessed the transformative power of compassion, and it reshaped how he approached challenges, relationships, and opportunities. He felt a deep responsibility to honor that kindness, not only by caring for his son, but also by extending empathy and support to others whenever he could. Over time, the father and son became stronger, closer, and more resilient. The memories of hardship remained, not as burdens, but as reminders of what they had overcome together. The bond between them deepened, forged in the fires of fear and tempered by love and stability. They learned to cherish small moments, to find joy in simplicity, and to trust in the kindness of others and the strength within themselves. The father often reflected on the journey from fear to hope, from helplessness to empowerment. The woman's intervention was a pivotal moment, but it was also his perseverance, love, and dedication that had allowed the transformation to take hold. He understood that while external help could change circumstances, the enduring change came from within, fueled by care, commitment, and the courage to keep moving forward. As the sun set on another day, the father watched his son run freely in their yard, laughter echoing in the warm evening air. He felt a sense of peace and accomplishment that he had never known before. The trials of the past had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. Hope, resilience, love, and the quiet power of human kindness had created a life that was richer, fuller, and filled with possibility. The story ended not with drama or sudden miracles, but with quiet triumphs, the steady rebuilding of life, and the recognition that even in the darkest moments, compassion, courage, and connection could illuminate the path forward. The father and son had survived, grown, and thrived, a living testament to the power of love, hope, and one act of human kindness that changed everything.